Hi everyone, my name is Ahmed. I run a human rights organization called Kawakibi Foundation, and I want to tell you the story of adverse incentives playing out and what it looks like when systemic, multi-level governance failures happen in your country and your country goes off the rails with nobody at the wheel. So what does systemic collapse look like? I'm going to give you a case study of Egypt. It's one of the 20+ countries that we work on. There's nothing exceptional about it, but it's just a good story. So Egypt has had a rapid population growth over the last few decades. It's added about 24 million people in the last 10 years, and there's not enough infrastructure of any kind to support that. Not transportation, not housing, not energy, not water. It's a water-stressed country in the most water-stressed region on Earth. It has massive external debt and spends about half the national budget each year servicing that debt. Because of that, it's had to seek external loans and devalue its currency multiple times, 45% in 2016, 40% in 2023, and a third this last March. That's led to a total collapse in living standards. The middle class has been wiped out, and with that the tax base, and tens of millions of people have been plunged into poverty. There's about 20% recorded youth unemployment, and the military runs an estimated 40 to 60% of the economy. Nobody knows exactly how much. So in the face of these existential looking crises, the government responded by doing what any responsible government would do. They took a string of loans from the International Monetary Fund. Economists have called them a beggar state now. They used some of those funds, tens of billions of dollars, to build a new capital city in the desert. Did I mention the water stress? They depend on the River Nile for most of their water, and one of their upriver neighbors, Ethiopia, has been building a dam. This dam has been planned and constructed over 2 decades, and they sat around and did nothing until it was almost ready and then threatened to bomb the dam. How to make friends and influence people 101. And they've also been building prisons at a horrifying rate. At least 35 prisons over the last decade, including 5 US-style mega prisons. So despite the existential threats facing the country, it's really clear that the government sees the primary danger as its own population. You can see that a lot of the ways they've tried to address these problems are basically reinforcing the original problems or the systems that created these problems in the first place. So the system is getting further and further away from being able to solve these problems. This is what it looks like when the internal systems of autocracies fail. You have extreme corruption, you have weak governance, you have a ruling generation who are extremely separate, even in age, from the rest of the population and don't understand them. You have a lack of any kind of vision of what the future looks like and how to get there. A lack of accountability systems and no way of error correcting. Chronic short-termism. Every single decision is made based on the easiest short-term thing, even if that causes more long-term disasters. And seriously misaligned incentives to the extent where it's an adversarial system. The government is fighting against its population to survive. That's what internal system failures look like in autocracies. They can also happen in democratic systems, and you notice that they're basically the same things. They just play out over a much longer time period and a little less viciously because there are still some vestiges of error correction. These internal system failures are happening within an external system failure, which is an international relations paradigm which was built for a very different world. It was built for a world in which nation states were self-contained, relatively self-sufficient, and addressing internal problems on sub-lifetime timescales. None of that is still relevant, and hence the tools being used to resolve these problems and conflicts on an international level are often exacerbating problems and conflicts instead of fixing them. So what do? We can't do what this guy's doing. Not until Elon gets us to Mars. But even when he does, we will probably replicate the same systems that we're used to creating here. So we better get good at creating more functional systems. The good news is that the Nobel Prize in Economics was just awarded a few weeks ago for some economists who explained how this happens, why some systems of governance succeed phenomenally and why some completely collapse. And the answer wasn't related to culture or availability of natural resources or geography, it's just institutions. Institutions have self-reinforcement mechanisms, and they either make your country better in a virtuous cycle or worse in a vicious cycle. This is an example of an error correction mechanism. It's called homeostasis, and it's how the human body keeps its systems aligned. If anything drifts too far in one direction or the other, it has a system to bring that back into balance. No complex organism survives without this. What does an error correction mechanism look like in complex human social governance? We already know the basics. Freedom of speech, so you can find out what the problems are. Systems of accountability, so you can remove people who are making bad decisions or committing crimes. Limits on power, and dispersing power through society so that you're less vulnerable to a single system failing. I want to mention how we're trying to have an impact on this area as a human rights organization. So first of all, we start off by accepting that these problems are vicious and there is no short-term solution. So we're working on very long timescales. We started a research center trying to deeply understand institutional dynamics and feedback loops in our region. So how these systems interconnect and how global systems affect them, the impact of technological change and more. After that, we tried to build a system for activating what we're studying. So we accelerate activism in the region by equipping them with the tools that they need. For example, one of the ways that failing governments make their societies more fragile is by cutting off all alternate sources of legitimacy from the financial system so that they can't succeed. We are getting activists and organizations inside the Middle East and North Africa on chain so that they're uncut off from the financial system and able to get the funds to do their work. As governance systems around the world are becoming increasingly dysfunctional, we basically have a choice what to replace them with. We either have the Taiwan model, where you have society's involvement, you have grassroots movements, experimentation, collaboration, tech serving citizens, and applying your values in new ways. Or you have techno-authoritarianism. You find a competent leader, you centralize all the power around them, and you probably get rapid technological and economic growth, but you also have to pay the price of that. The price of that could look like journalists being killed and cut to pieces inside their country's embassies. It could look like women's rights activists being brutalized in prisons. It could look like academics being jailed and tortured for mere tweets. These are all things that happen in our region. I have one warning for you in case that's a difficult choice to make, and that's that global systems are deeply interconnected, and failure modes of these systems tend to metastasize around the world. They don't stay contained. And some people believe that we can reach a stable equilibrium between having authoritarian governments in some parts of the world and liberal democracies elsewhere. That doesn't work. There is no stable equilibrium between them because these systems tend to export their values and especially export the systems that reinforce their values. We've seen this increasingly in recent years as we've seen things like disinformation, mobile spyware, and transnational repression, techniques that were developed in the laboratories of authoritarian regimes, basically become internationalized and released on the world. The good news is that we choose which systems to empower. We've heard from so many people building systems that can make a difference over the last few days. I'd advise to builders to include activists in your spaces, to connect with us, to collaborate, to support us, and to study our problems because they may someday be yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for your presentation. So we'll have Q&A as usual, so it's the last day, so you probably already know how this goes. But yeah, I encourage you once again to participate, even either by asking questions or, of course, by upvoting. So the first question that we have received is, equality under the law is a liberal value, but equity is equality of outcome, which is not a liberal value, but a socialist value, isn't it?
That's a political conversation. I don't want to impose my own values. Like, these things are being discussed within all societies, but it's about developing systems that manifest the values that you want to see and making sure those systems are strong and protected.
Thank you. And then the other question we've received so far is, what if autocratic governments can be more effective than democracies?
This is a real problem that people are studying in democratization. My own sense is that they can be more effective, but you have no way of making sure that they are. And if you choose that path and then it turns out not to be more effective, you can't go back and change the selection. So you might be trying to select a Singapore model and you end up with more of an Iran model. Whereas with democratic systems, you can at least change your mind and try something different if what you tried first didn't work.
Thanks. And we have one more question. So, of course, we have some more time for questions, so please feel free to send in more. So this question is, why do liberal democracies choose authoritarian leaders?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about this over the last few years. I think it's multi-causal. One of the reasons is that people feel so deeply delusioned by the existing system that they just want someone to come and destroy it. And it's a fact that a lot of people feel unrepresented by systems of governance in a lot of liberal democracies. They feel like they're set up to cater for special interests, especially specific economic interests, and the system which claims to represent everyone equally doesn't actually represent everyone. I think that's one of the key reasons.
Thanks. And the next question that just came in, are we facing an epoch of all authoritarian leaders colluding?
We absolutely are. We see that in our region. Authoritarian governments get together, they share intelligence, they share technology, they share techniques. We even had a hashtag in the Arab Spring, early in the Arab Spring. We used to tweet on the hashtag Arab Tyrant Manual, because it was so comical the extent to which certain responses to popular protest would spread from country to country and just keep appearing in different places, that it was almost like they were reading from a single manual. So I think that civil society has to collaborate at least as effectively as authoritarians if we want to succeed.
Next question is, how do we provide hope to combat disillusionment? Can crypto play a role in this?
I hope so, but it depends on us again. It depends on what systems we use it to build and whether they're centralizing systems, whether they're just casinos for gambling, or whether they are systems of representation and accountability and enabling more effective institutions to exist.
Yeah, thank you. And then we also have the question, if autocratic governments can be more effective, we are going to end up in a China-like global state?
I don't think so. I think autocratic governments fight between each other far too much. It's all about ego and centralization. But that's also why we're all doing what we're doing. It's because we want to ensure that we live in accountable societies.
Thanks. And what concrete steps do you think the average person can take to push society in the right direction on this issue?
That really depends on your position and your skills and your background. I'd say you have to study what you can do really deeply and think hard about it and choose a path and make sure that your life has a purpose and you're working for that purpose, not to just go through looking after yourself financially and contributing nothing to the world.
And coming to probably the second to last question, a global collaboration of fascists does not really make sense, no? Will this be a global meritocracy? Will classism beat racism?
I have no idea. Again, it depends on if we build systems that reinforce our values, or if we allow systems to be built that reinforce autocracy. And again, the choice is entirely up to us and whether we do our work well. And it's the next generation mostly that's going to reap the consequences of the systems that we build in our lifetimes.
Cool. And then we come to the final question, which is, how can we enable decentralization without resisting liberal values completely?
I mean, that's deeply philosophical, and I'd love to have a chat about it afterwards, whoever asked that.
Okay, perfect. With that, we come to a close. Thank you so much for the presentation and the